Good evening, everybody. My name is Ari Bergman, from anybody who doesn't know me. And we want to make this class, number one, informative and fun. And I want people's interaction. I want people to participate. If you don't agree with something, please let us know. Let me know. Make yourself heard. That's number one. Number two, I would love to get insight from you. Because let's talk about what is the goal of the course. Okay, let's decide what we're trying to achieve here. We are going to go ahead and to focus on Buddhism. We can only focus an outsider, right? I'm not an insider, but we are going to look in a secular way of what the ideas are of Buddhism. We have only 3 classes, so we can't go much in depth. We'll try to give an overview and to select some ideas. And then to contrast and compare how Judaism deals with the same concepts and ideas. Because I'm sure that a lot of people, as I heard from last week, think that in Judaism, such things are not available, when in truth they are. There are differences, but I think it's a very rich experience to see how Judaism, how being Jewish, deals with the same issues. How thinkers have dealt, and how Buddhism approached those issues, and Judaism approached also. Now, we are going to go, it's not a historically focused course. It's more existential. What I want to focus in ideas and how these ideas came about and how Jews, us as Jews, approach those ideas, how the Buddhist approach. And for you to, at the end, have some kind of an idea of how to compare and to say, okay, which one talks more to me, when, why? Which one can make my life better? And the concept is how to approach and incorporate these ideas to our lives to make our lives in America better. Meaning, when I'm moving to Tibet, and I'm not sure how many people are moving from here to Jerusalem either. So you're going to see how Tibet meets Jerusalem, how the rabbis meet the Dalai Lama in ideas, and to see, and for us to judge which ideas make more sense, not in the abstract, but what ideas make more sense to us. And I would love in the end to hear from you what and how do you compare the ideas. Okay? So we are going to embark in this journey, which is Buddhism and Judaism. Now, Buddhism, let me ask you something, guys. Which one is an older tradition? Judaism or Buddhism? Whoever thinks that Judaism is an older tradition, please raise your hands. Whoever thinks that Buddhism is an older tradition, raise your hands. Usually the consensus is wrong. But in this case, see, Buddhism, we don't know really when it started. Some people say it's as old as 2000 BCE. Now, most scholars believe that this is somewhere around 500 BCE. But Buddhism doesn't come on its own. It doesn't come from Adam. It doesn't come from fresh cloth. It's a development of another tradition. Which other tradition is developing? What is the birth of Buddhism? Anybody? What does it say? Meaning someone just wakes up and becomes the Buddha? Or, yes, from Hinduism. Excellent. First of all, who said that? Excellent. What's your name? Michael. I just don't no attribution. I just want to get to know you guys. So Michael said, it's true. It comes from Buddhism, from Hinduism. But let me tell you something. Hinduism in itself, you realize that isms, Judaism, Buddhism, Hinduism, it's called the isms. It's a creation that we created. Or whatever you hear something ism, Christianism, or if they call Christianity, because Christianity gave the name to everybody, so they called everybody else isms, and themselves is Christianity. But the isms is an invention of 19th century, mostly by Christians, of something that they didn't understand. So the Hinduism in itself, just parenthetically, is probably a misnomer. Because Hinduism is not one religion in India, but a bunch of religions. They don't even know, they don't consider themselves as Hindus. Do you know when was the first time a Hindu called himself a Hindu?
When the British arrived?
When what?
When the British arrived.
No, earlier than that. But it's good. What's your name? Matt. Close. When the Arabs arrived, when they saw a Muslim, they realized, 1 second, as much different as I am from my neighbor, this guy is actually much more different than I am. So he said, you know something, me and my neighbor, that we thought that we believed in different things. Listen, they have a pantheon of millions of deities. So probably not two neighbors have the same deity. So they probably looked themselves at two different religions. But when they saw a Muslim, they said, one second, know something. Islam is actually a lot more different than we are. So it creates identity by difference, right? By seeing somebody who is not you. So he derives from Hinduism. He is in Tibet, the Buddha. Now, we are going to talk about the Buddha as a person. His name was Siddhartha. Okay? Now, the history of the Buddha, like we saw last week from David Rubin, is a misnomer. We don't know what's history, what's myth, what is really one person, maybe it's a composite. But in essence, it doesn't matter. We are not trying to see historically who he was. We are trying in this course to learn about ideas. So let's talk about the idea of Buddhism. The idea of Buddhism is somebody called Siddhartha Gautama, and he was, the tradition says he was born, give or take in the year 500, 526 perhaps BCE, to a king, as a prince, as a very wealthy person, Siddhartha Gautama. Now their tradition is that he is a Buddha, and a Buddha is somebody who achieves enlightenment, and achieves enlightenment is not a path that you can achieve in one life, but is a path that takes numerous lives. And we'll soon see why this was an idea that made sense for them. But here's this Siddhartha, who is a prince, and he is bestowed with most luxuries in the world, women. He was a very smart guy, very successful, and his father tried to maintain him secluded from the rest of the population. As you could imagine, the population, as you'll see in Hinduism, there are the castes, which is also a British invention, the castes. But they are divided between different groups. As we all know that we call them castes, but different groups. So he was in a very, very successful group. He was a prince. And his father tried to maintain him away from everything else, to see life in a very idyllic way. And he lived this very perfect life. That's what tradition says. And he actually gets married, and his wife is pregnant. And finally, he's able to get out of the palace, and he has the 4 sights. He sees 4 different kinds of people that actually shatter his whole idyllic world. This guy lives in Disney World, and life is perfect because he has been completely closed off from the rest of life, and he's seen 4 things that change his life. Does anybody know what the 4 sights are? The first thing he sees is an old person. So he never was exposed to aging. So he said, you know something, life is so transient. Here I am, so successful, young. I have whatever I want. But then he sees somebody old, and he realizes that being young and strong and happy comes to an end. So he sees aging. By the way, if you look at the website, and this course is made to the following idea. We want to give you something which is really real. We're not trying to sell you ideas. The only way for you to appreciate is to see the literature inside, from an insider's point of view. So on this website, on the Moodle, you have the materials. And you have on the life of the Buddha, you have an introduction to Tibetan Buddhism, which brings the life of the Buddha. And you see how they present and how the Buddha himself, in the translation of the Sanskrit, describes when he sees an old person. The second thing he sees is a sick person. So he realizes that even when you're young, he's very transient, because you might be young and life will come to an end. In other words, you might be sick. Then he sees what else? He sees death. And he is faced to the concept that life, if you are young and you turn old, it's a change. If you are healthy and you become sick, God forbid, it's a change. So, but one change that you cannot escape is death. So he comes out to the conclusion that life, no matter how happy you are, in the end, you end up reaching suffering. And you become to something that you can't escape from suffering. Until he meets the 4th sight. What did he meet? He met an ascetic, a person who decided to seclude himself from all physical pleasures. And he realized that that person was indeed happy. So in other words, he had nothing to lose because he had nothing. And by having nothing to lose, he was actually happy. So he comes to the realization that perhaps the more you have, the more you have to lose. And therefore, the more you have, the more suffering you end up reaching. So life is a travel to suffering. So he reaches that great sight and he says, you know something, I want to leave the palace. And he wants to leave his wife, and he goes to search for that innate happiness that perhaps doesn't get lost, doesn't get aged, doesn't get sick, and actually doesn't die. So he looks for that in his lifetime. Now, I want to position this in time. This is the 500 BC. You realize that the world, this age, the 500 BC to give or take 200 BC, but if you take in a large scale from the 5th century to the birth of Christ, 500 years, has a name by historians. Not all historians agree, but I am a big fan of that. Can anybody give me a name for that period? This 3 or 4 or 500 years? What name is it? Anybody? It's called the Axial Age. A-X-I-E-A-L. The Axial Age. Because the world changes on its axis. Because all religions go through a great change at that point in time. Debatable why, debatable how, but this is something that happens. It happens in Judaism. It can happen in Christianity. You know why? Because Christianity wasn't there, right? Okay? So Hinduism changes. It goes from the old scriptures, because if you look at it, Buddhism is not as old as Judaism. But perhaps where it comes from is Hinduism. Not Hinduism, but the tradition of the Vedas. The Vedas are the scripture of Hindus. So Hindus, I told you, even though you might not have one Hinduism, you might have many, but all of them believed in the scriptures called the Vedas. So the Vedas are very, very old. Some people say it might be 10,000 years old. So that would be older than Judaism. But it's debatable if it's older or not, but it's a very old tradition. But the Vedas go through a transition. And the Vedas become Buddhism, which is, you'll soon see how that happens. So that challenge of life, that people are challenging the status quo, is something that's happening in Tibet. It's happening in Israel. It's happening everywhere. It's called the Axial Age. Zoroastrians change also. They had the Vesta, and they go to the Zans. They also change their scriptures. Okay? Hindus themselves go from the Vedas to something. Does anybody know where the Hindus go from? What the transition is? I told you, Buddhism is an offshoot. But the Hindus themselves also change. Anybody who did not become a Hindu also goes through a change. That the Vedas are not enough anymore. You know what they go to? The Mahabharata is later, is the Upanishads. Right? The Upanishads are early. The Upanishads are, and the Upanishads, all of the people are, because once upon a time it was very focused on rituals. They did sacrifice, they did rituals. And here they go into some kind of an existential question. This is the search for happiness, for growth within. Not from the outside, but from within. If you want, I'll tell you how Jewish texts, because we go in the transition from the first temple. This is the transition. You know, in Jewish history, if you go into the Jewish chronology, what happens at that time? This is the time when the first temple was prophecy and was a time when people brought rituals, they brought sacrifices, and there was the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark of the Covenant gets hidden away. It gets buried. You realize that at that time in 500 BC, and that's when Ezekiel has his famous vision of the angels, which all Kabbalah is built upon. Also at the same time in 500 BC, give or take. Interesting that this is happening in Judaism. That is the end of one phase, which is the first temple rituals. This is the burial of the Ark of Covenant. And people go into the oral law, into Kabbalah, into search. This is the early age of mysticism, right? But this is the vision of Ezekiel, which is built at the same time. So you look at that position. So the Buddha was not the only person searching for meaning at that time. A lot of people were searching for meaning. So he goes ahead and he says, okay, I have to search for happiness. I realize that my possessions are going to lead to suffering. I want to get out of it. So what does he do? So he goes ahead and he decides to join some kind of the gurus, to be taught with them, to get some kind of ideas. And he goes and he decides to be an ascetic. That was a person that was happy. And he goes through major asceticism. And he decides to fast, and he becomes very skinny. I think that's why the Buddha is very fat in every picture, because he was at the time that he was very, very skinny, and he actually almost died. And he realized, something, this is not bringing to happiness either. I mean, you could fool yourself, but that ain't bringing to anything else. Maybe when you lost your first couple pounds, you get happy, but if you lost too many of those pounds, it's anorexia, so it doesn't work. So the Buddha says, that's it. And there are 12 stages in the life of the Buddha, and the Buddha goes by the water and by a tree, and he has his moment of enlightenment. And the moment of enlightenment, he comes to the Four Noble Truths, which we're going to spend time into a different take on Hinduism and on life. And we'll soon see this is the beginning of Buddhism, and we're going to see the scriptures, how he writes it. In the beginning was not viewed as a religion. He saw himself as this magical being called the Buddha that had many reincarnations. And he was a Buddha, which is an enlightened being, that he came here to teach the people. And he does teach. And he doesn't even bring, what's interesting about Buddhism, there's no proof. He didn't do any miracles, no revelation, nothing. It's the Honda of religions. Why? It's the car that sells itself. He said himself, as you'll see in your reading materials, go to the Introduction to Buddhism, when he told the first council, he says, how do you know if something is genuinely from the Buddha, from Siddhartha Gautama, and how do you know that something is a fake, something was distorted, something that makes sense? It's mine. If it doesn't make sense, it's not mine. That's the easiest way to sell the ideas. Now, you'll see the life of the Buddha you have on Introduction to Tibetan Buddhism. Once you go here, I'll show you just. If you have interest in reading it in detail, you'll be able to see. And this is all the story of the Buddha. These are the 12 steps. His life, like every mythological story, has these miracles and these stories. And this is all of it, what it says. And he goes into the four people. He sees the old age. He sees sickness, he sees death, and he sees an ascetic. Okay, and this is the whole story when he decides to go into this moment of enlightenment up to the first council. In the first council, when he dies, you'll see here describes his moment of death, which is called, does anybody know what the name of his death is? When he achieves total enlightenment, it's called the nirvana, right? He reaches nirvana. And when he reaches nirvana, that's it. That's the end, and you could see the whole story here. Another site which is interesting here that you have, let's just go back.
Is that very different from Siddhartha?
Siddhartha, the book I haven't read, but this is what they use at Columbia University. So I would assume Columbia University, our Department of Buddhism happens to be, and listen, I can only tell you what I learned, right? And say Columbia University is a representative of the Dalai Lama, right? So it's very close to Tibetan Buddhism. So I'm showing you Tibetan Buddhism because that is what the School of Columbia is. So the materials that I will use with you is what you'd use if you are an undergraduate student or a graduate student in the religion department of Columbia University. That's the book that they use by Powers. And again, this is not history. That's what you'll say. If any book is worth his time, will tell you, listen, Hindus never recorded history because we have a very westernized approach to history, right? We record things and dates and etc. Most people don't care about history. Most cultures, they care about something called memory, what you remember things to be. Because in essence, what really happened makes no difference. It only makes a difference how people in his time recorded what happened. There's a great book by a great Jewish historian called Yosef Haim Yerushalmi. He was a professor of history at Columbia University. He passed away. And he wrote a great book called Zachor. Zachor is the role of Jewish memory versus history. History is very dry. You look at facts, you look at papers. And in essence, you're never sure of really what happened. You read something in the papers, you never know. We just saw the WikiLeaks, right? All the leaks about this correspondence. And is it true? Is it really correspondence? Did people make this thing up? Is it a Mossad ploy? Or is it an American ploy? We don't know. So the reality of it is that in history, you can never know, right? But memory is what counts. So this is memory. So this is powers. So here in these few pages, you have the history of the Buddha, if you want to know, and if you care about knowing. Now, this is a great website. Yes? Jenny, yes.
Hindu, so Buddhism and Hindu now are two separate religions.
Right.
But how do they have similar belief systems?
We are going to go into it, yes. We are going to see, okay, and we can go. I will show you. Again, Hinduism was never one religion. It's a bunch of religions. If anybody tells about one Hinduism, I told you, somebody who has millions of deities and nobody shares the same belief, how the heck do they know, right? But interestingly enough, the Upanishads, as they come to reinterpret the Vedas, are very similar to Buddhism. So it's a change. And you'll see that it's very, very similar. Okay? Again, everything evolved. We are taking 500 BC, as you could imagine, in the beginning of the Common Era, as Christianity takes place, this thing changes. And today you go to, first of all, it's interesting, you look from the books, you have one idea, and then you see how people practice is something totally different. You realize that religion evolves as a sociological idea. Here we're trying to have in 3 days to share some of the original ideas of the Buddha, how he wrote in the Pali scriptures. He did write scriptures. He does have writings. So the writings are the writings. So you take the ideas at face value, and that's what we're going to try to do. Now, this website is a great resource, use the Columbia University also, that you have all the stories of the Buddha with nice pictures, okay? So it's always good. Maya's dream, you have such... By the way, this stuff, you get to see how people think. Let me just parenthetically. When you see, I always tell people on these WikiLeaks, okay? This is Islam. On our course in Islam, we'll focus on it. But if you realize that the King Abdullah, right, of Saudi Arabia, the U.S. tells Clinton that you should kill you should stop the Iranians, you should cut the snake's head. That's what he says. So you write, okay, snake's head. You realize that the snake, for us Westerners, it means one thing. For the Arabs, if you look in the hadith, it means something else. So you realize that when we read, cut the snake's head, okay, we say the snake is an animal that you kill the snake, okay. But if you read in the hadith, killing and cutting the snake's head, when an Iranian reads it, something means something very different. But you can't have that nuance unless you know the inside. And that's what we're trying to give you. So these sites will show you, in the Buddhism, their own views written by people who believe themselves to be Buddhists. Interesting to see, right? So here you have all the stuff, the imagery. Okay, we can't go. This is for the course. But the snake, I'll give you a 1-minute digression because otherwise we'll digress forever. The snake means in the hadith. Does anybody know? When you come to the Islam course, you'll learn what the hadith is. Does anybody know what the hadith is? Yes. The oral tradition, right? The sunnahs of the Prophet. So they have the sunnah of the Prophet says the following story. By the way, anybody knows, where does the serpent mention in the Quran? Where would you think it's mentioned? The Garden of Eden, right? Because he does retell all the stories of the Bible in their own ways. No, it doesn't. The snake, the one who actually gives the fruit to Adam is the Satan, not the snake. Okay? Now, the snake is only mentioned one time. Parenthetically speaking, when Moses takes the stick and throws it, he turns it into a snake. Very nothing. Snake and serpent in Arabic, and again, we have to see the nuance. I know a little bit of Arabic, but not enough to know the nuance if for them makes a difference. Okay? That's a very good point. Because every translation is mediation. In America, we know in English we have serpent and snake, very different things. In Arabic, as an example, again, we can't digress too much. In Hebrew, how many words do you have for the word desert? in English. One word, right? In Hebrew, there are, I think, 7 words for the word desert. And why? Because for us, desert is something like in the Sahara. Who cares, right? Has sand, it doesn't rain, it's a desert. But somebody who lives in a desert, if the desert has rocks or it has sand, it's a very different thing. So there's 7 words. For us, huh? Exactly right. And in Hebrew, everyone, exactly right. This is something that you should always be careful. So people say, a snake or serpent, it's an English concept. You have to know if the Arabs, meaning perhaps they had more snakes, and I'm not expert enough to know. But the story of the snake or the serpent is one story in the hadith that a guy comes to his house, and his wife is sleeping with somebody else. So the guy goes to kill the guy. I mean, if you adultery, is punished by death. So the guy goes to kill the guy who's sleeping with his wife, and there is a snake that attacks him and kills him. And the question is, what is the lesson that the prophet is telling on this story? So who cares? So the snake kills him. Okay, well, what does that mean? So, not the adulterer, the husband. Right? Not the adulterer. The adulterer put the snake to kill the. So what's the message? So the message is, according to most interpreters in the hadith, they'll say the message is that if you find a snake in the house, you've got to take the snake out because the guy is a snake. And if you don't take him out, you've got to kill him. Which, in other words, the snake represents the adulterer. If you have somebody in your house that if you don't comfortable with him, take him out, otherwise he's going to kill you. So in other words, if you have people in your house who are too close to your wife, send him away before he kills you. That's the message. So the snake, the message is the snake. The snake, you get him out of the house. And if he doesn't get out, just kill him because otherwise he'll kill you. Now you could understand what they're saying about Iran, right? So if Ahmadinejad is the snake, right? If he doesn't get out of the house, he's the snake that the Sunnah of the Prophet tells you. If you don't get him out and kill him, he'll kill you, right? That's it. So now you can understand why he tells you to cut the snake. Going back to life, right? To Buddhism. That's how we are. So focus on Buddhism. You got to know what they think about themselves because, again, we always project our own images on somebody else. We don't want to do that, right? So here in this website, you have Maya's dreams, the stories, the Queen Maya's dream, because when his mother got pregnant, where he comes, the Brahmin priests, and you have the Siddhartha story. So this website, if you want to go, if you have time or interest, you could go on the website and see the story of the Buddha. Okay? But we're not going to spend much more time on that. And this is the issue here. You go to the king, Sudana, and Siddhartha when he comes, and how he fights, and the renunciation, and how he dies, and etc. These are the 4 sights. See, these are the 4 sights that he sees, right? Siddhartha sees the 4 sights, and you have a very nice website that shows you when he sees these people, okay? And you see it's all imagery, all idea of the 4, tons to be said. Okay, he has this enlightenment, the moment of enlightenment. And the moment of enlightenment, he realizes that the way he is offered a bowl of rice, he was being at that time a big ascetic, he was almost dying, he was offered a bowl of rice, a sweet rice, which at that time was a big luxury item. He eats it and decides to be ascetic is not the way. And he says, I have to go ahead and find this happiness or this enlightenment from within. And he goes into a tree and he thinks and he thinks and he meditates until eureka, he gets it. And he finds the 4 noble truths. And the 4 noble truths, we are going to go in detail to unpack the idea, but the 4 noble truths are, does anybody know what was the moment of enlightenment that he goes and he says, what are the 4 noble truths? Anybody?
What they are.
Yes. What are the 4 noble truths that define the life of the Buddha? And this becomes the linchpin of Buddhism. Yes. So the first one. So we'll go to this website. You have here on the website the 4 noble truths. Okay? It's very interactive. See the 4 noble truths. I don't think that he had a website to provide enlightenment, but life is always easier with that. Or click on number. Let's go see the first noble truth. Okay? The first noble truth is the existence of impermanence. Nothing is forever, and therefore you will get to suffering. Nothing, listen to what he says, nothing lasts forever. When you understand that, this makes it easier not to be so attached to what you're experiencing. So the first noble truth is, don't ever be attached so much to something, because if you get attached too much, if you create the attachment, you might have a great enjoyment, but you're setting yourself for big disappointment, big disillusion. We are going to go into these ideas in much more detail next week. But I just want to give you the second noble truth. Okay? Suffering exists, that's the first one. And the suffering has a cause. The cause of it is craving. That's what he said. There is suffering, and you can't get away from the suffering. The second is suffering is caused by craving. Second noble truth. Desire. We're going to unpack the ideas because it's very easy. See, the risk of Buddhism, etc., becomes like this pop culture that you go on the website and you think that you could get this thousands of years of literature by clicking, and that's not what it goes. Life is not that easy. It would be very nice if it is, but it's not. Okay? And then the third noble truth, okay, is that there is such a thing as cessation of suffering. Suffering exists. You can't get away from it. Number one. Number two, suffering has a cause. Number three, because if you take the root cause out, you can actually, suffering is not inevitable. You can get away from suffering. And the fourth noble truth is the way there is a path of cessation of suffering is in the eightfold path. And we're going to analyze each and every one of them next week. Okay? So that the Four Noble Truths of the Buddha, and all Buddhism is built on this Four Noble Truths. We are going to see exactly how the Buddha writes this in his own language, not in Sanskrit, but with a good English translation of the Pali scriptures. That he left the scriptures that he wrote, his writings, of Siddhartha himself, that was given to the first council. And do we know that he really wrote it, or as part of this? That's what's attributed to him, given to the first council. And we're going to read in his own words to see how he says that. Okay? But today what we're going to focus is something else. We're going to take one of the Hindu traditions that he took, and he re-explained them to explain life. And that's one of the big insights of the Buddha, to understand how life in his own context works. And I want to contrast this to how Jewish thought approaches it, and I think it's something very, very important to know. And this concept is something called karma and samsara. Okay? Karma and samsara is not an idea that the Buddha created. That's why I want to start with it. This is something that existed in the Hindu tradition for the Vedas and before, but the Buddha reinterpreted. Can anybody explain to me what samsara is? Does anybody know what samsara is? Anybody? The cycle of life. What's your name? David? It's exactly the cycle of life. Because the Hindus believed on transmigration of souls, or reincarnation. That people are born many times. Right? People are born several times. And therefore, life here, as you live today, doesn't explain in itself. The reason why your life looks the way how it is a function of a previous life. So first of all, that's a great social control kind of thing, right? Nobody can be unhappy because you can't blame anybody else, just you. Now, what's to blame? You're a little child, you blame a previous life, right? And the previous life reflects life. So this cycle of life, that is samsara. Okay? It's the cycle, the never-ending cycle of life. If you want to see, I'm going to show you. This is a very, very important theory in Buddhism. And this is the different depictions of the cycle of life. Okay? These are different cycles of life. And you could go into different parts, and the cycle of life will take you. Let's make it a little bit bigger. First of all, let's go to the previous cycle. See, this monster, this very ugly face. I'm not sure if you can see it, but you could see on your website. And this is the cycle of life. The different people come back. And therefore, your life is a function of previous lives, and your life today will determine future lives. How is that process of determining it? is something called karma. Yes?
So there's no incentive for people at the top of society to aim for progress.
This is exactly the issue. That's how they kept social order. In the castes, this comes to explain the life in India. In life in India, there were the castes. The castes were different groups, right? The top of them, what the top group was called, anybody knows? The Brahmins. Who were the Brahmins? They were the priests, right? And they were them. And what is the lowest below everything? The untouchables. What did the untouchables? So the untouchables are untouchables, right? So now you created social order. Now this social order, there were duties, there were obligations, and there were rights. But people didn't rebel. Now, how progress fits into this, the whole idea of progress is also a Western idea. And everybody knows, you see, the history of life is so interesting. We are in life in America, we are like bombarded with ideas that we think that that's how things are. But they don't realize that this is how people indoctrinated us to be. Who, if you remember from our courses, who were the beginning of this idea of progress? Jews, but Jews is debatable also how you view progress. Progress is Darwinism, right? We saw Darwinism because evolution, this idea of evolution created the justification, and then people took this idea of progress and they always try to fit things in. They take the Bible, evolution, and even evolution.
But the prophets, constant criticism moves society forward.
Or moves, it's not simple. Again, this is a Western way of reading scriptures. Because if you read scriptures from inside, a lot of people believe that the world is regressing. In other words, that pristine creatures are there before, because you realize something. And with this, we could eventually develop into a course, because time, the perspective of time, realize before we had Mount Sinai, people spoke to God. Adam speaks to God like if it was common sense, right? Where are you? God asks, where are you? I say, I'm here behind the bushes. It's interesting, right? Like, you say, oh, second, please give me a second. And today, to speak to God, it's a lot more difficult. Basically, it's not a local call anymore. You could think that that's a long-distance call. So what happened to the world, right? So if the world is in progress, why is that progress? Progress is a very Western idea that we're going to see. And if you want to see how the idea is developed, and you'll see how these things become, and it's very Jewish progress. It is. But you see where it comes and how it's constituted. Very easy. But they don't see that. The Buddhists see as a cycle. That's why I want to show you the pictures. It's very important to see the pictures. Time is not linear. It's a circle. So this thing keeps going back and forth. Yes? What's your name?
It's not true that they don't see a progress. They just see progress from a different perspective. Because they're looking for progress from the soul, like as a person, you have to become better. I mean, you just keep reincarnating as you become better to reach nirvana.
No, that's a Buddhist idea. I'm not going into this thing. Let's go talk about it. You're right. You're going to see the Buddhist take on that. Because the Buddha was going to take the two. We're going to soon see in a second. But on Hindu ideas, the Vedas and etc., what is progressing to be? Let's say you're a Brahmin. You're on top of that pyramid. You're the Brahmin. Again, the castes, British people went and they wanted to control. That's Orientalism. They wanted to control the natives. So they took the castes and they created a vertical pyramid. Because this way they fostered discontent. It's interesting. The Hindus never saw themselves on the vertical pyramid. They saw on the horizontal. Very interesting, again, how we actually manipulated all this data to actually hegemonize people. Meaning, we look at life and we have such a nice view of life, but it's pretty corrupted, as we've seen, right? What we did and how we took cultures and just turned them into our own views of things and indoctrinated them. So it's not simple. The Hindus didn't see that so much, that you go ahead and you get out. So the Hindu life, there was samsara. We're going to soon see the Buddha, how the Buddha takes samsara. Okay? But in a second. So samsara is a circle. Doesn't have to be progress. We're going to see, yes. Again, there's not one Hinduism. I don't want to also... Hinduism, I told you, there are millions of Hinduisms. The ism is in itself a violation of everything we know. Yes?
So Hindus don't believe in progress, but there's an awareness of reincarnation. Is there a sense of responsibility to the...
There is, for sure. We'll soon see how this changes because, again, we go to the Vedas. Now we're talking a point in time, 500 BC, when the Buddha is born. Right? And the Buddha is born, the Vedas get transformed by the Upanishads also. Nothing is stuck in mud. Nothing is frozen in time. Things will evolve. So Hinduism also evolves. You'll see how they translate it. But before we go and get too much involved into it, what is karma? Does anybody know what karma is? Karma. Very good. That's a good English take of it. But there is. The word karma means action, by the way, in Sanskrit. What does karma mean? What goes around comes around in some way. Means,
Destiny.
No. Is that you inherit what you do?
That's a consequence, that's a derivative. What is the issue? Karma means that what you have, what you do, has a meaning. It creates something. Your action creates energy, is action and reaction. It's a law of Newton. Anything that you do creates something. Nothing gets lost. You are accountable for anything you do. The laws of the universe. Whatever you do, you're going to reap the benefit. What goes around comes around. Life is a boomerang. So in other words, the samsara is created by your karma. Now, karma in the beginning of the Vedas was viewed as rituals. So you do rituals to the gods, you give them, and they give you back. Reciprocity, gifts, back and forth. The Buddha reinterprets it. And the Buddha says exactly this. The samsara, that cycle of life, is created by karma. Your karma that you do, you're creating energy that will come back. Is inevitable. Whatever you do comes back to you. Your reality is created by yourself, and the energy that's created is the karma. The karma might take one lifetime, might be immediate, and it might take millions of lifetimes to come back. And you have to progress. You have to use the karma to create a better life, to allow you to go to a better life, to come to a path, to use the samsara of the cycle of life, to not just be trapped in the cycle, but to take the cycle as a path of going up. And that's what he came out with, the karma and samsara. So he takes to karma and samsara, says the samsara is a reality of life. It's a reality of life that you come back many times. And what you come back is a function of the karma that you created. And that karma is never lost. It's always there, have an impact. But karma, good karma, can create better karma. You could have leverage of capital. This is the capital that you have in life. And this is how you attain Buddhahood. You become a bodhisattva. You can actually ingrain your life by creating positive energy. Then you create, you get, but you'll see that the Buddha will take this to the next level. But that's what he takes the Hindu ideas, and he says karma is not ritual. Karma is energy in anything that you do. You've got to search what has good karma or light karma and what has black karma, and we'll soon see who defines what. And the karma will light create your new existence, and the new existence leads you to another existence, and that's the idea of karma. So if you want to see a little bit, we're going to see just on the website. Yes, please.
So I think what you're saying is that in Hinduism, they didn't think that there was a relationship between action and your samsara. In other words, there was no way that you could actually affect your future.
Right.
But in a sense, destiny, that destiny is the Hindu definition.
Absolutely, but it changed with the Upanishads. The Buddha, at the same time, the Buddha took it in one direction, the Upanishads take in a very similar direction. The Upanishads are amazing also because they take all these deities, there's billions of deities, and they say that really it's only unity. It's all a God called Brahma, which is the God of everything. And he manifests himself in different ways, but it's the same God. So it's one God. So he takes this ultimate polytheism, this ultimate paganism, and turns into monistic ideas. Can you imagine? Let's take it 180 degrees, and that's what it is. Today, the Upanishads dictate, not the Vedas. The Vedas, like they say, when you read the Vestas, the Oda Vestas became the Zonda Vesta. everything got reinterpreted. That's the beauty of life. This 500 BC was life. Confucius, every big thinker, they took old traditions and they reinterpreted it. And so the Upanishads do reinterpret the Vedas to very similar to the Buddha.
But this theme of destiny is also something you see between pre-Jewish culture and Greek type mythology.
So Greek is much later. We have to be very careful, right? We are holding way before the Greek ideas, and around the same time, maybe 200 or 300 years later. But this is the Vedas are.
I'm talking about old Greek mythology, like pre-Aristotle.
Okay, pre-Aristotle, old Greek mythology, yes.
There's this idea of, there's the gods out there and they're affecting our lives, and the best we can do is...
And you just have to please them.
Right, as opposed to the biblical idea, which, there's this theme in the Bible of you do something and you reap the rewards of your good action.
That there is a very much, and we're going to soon see, that's a great point, that in the Bible you do have this idea that actions have a meaning and have a consequence. But we'll soon see. So the Buddha says the actions have a natural consequence. Whatever you do creates energy. Yes?
In Judaism, there's a character called the Gilgal.
We're going to see in a second. First, let's go to the Buddhism idea, then we're going to start the Judaism, which is a great idea. We're going to see it in a second, and we're going to see a source inside. But, okay, just 2 seconds. Karma, here you have it. These are the steps to enlightenment. If you want to know Buddhist karma, it's here. And you go, and here it goes, 1 second, let me just go to the next one. Okay, this is the general developing the faith, the certain karma. Oh, you can't read it. 1 second, let me just go on mine, which is a little bit better here. This is just the first little paragraph, okay? Developing the faith and the conviction that is the root of all being, okay? Contemplating karma and its results. The actual method of contemplating karma and its results, according to Buddhist theories, is the certainty of karma, that everything does, it will for sure happen. The magnification of karma, that good karma brings better karma. If an action is not performed, its results will not be met. But actions that are done do not perish. Now, it is fascinating. And you have all the materials here. We're not going to go because what happens if you did something that has bad karma? How do you neutralize it? Because karma doesn't become real until it actually happens. Let's say you did something bad and say, oh my gosh, now my future reincarnation is doomed. I just did something that I created. Is like you press the button and now the world is coming to an end. So how do you take care of it? Huh?
Something good.
But that neutralizes, but there's a certainty of karma. Karma can never cease to exist. So you just maybe neutralize. Your guy made himself into some kind of a crippled in future lives. So now he did something good. Now you have a wheelchair. He'll be a crippled with a wheelchair. But he's still crippled. How do you do? So they have the concept of repentance. Very similar to Jewish idea of Teshuvah. That you get the idea that you could, before karma becomes real, you could neutralize. So somebody last week said that Buddhisms don't have any rules. I mean, basically anything goes. And that's the fallacy number one. That's not true. Buddhism has the certainty of karma. And it's pretty tough because anything you do has a consequence and you can't escape. And the consequences are pretty doomed, and you can't blame anybody else. I mean, we love passing the blame. In America, we have a concept that anybody who has problems, he said because he was born in the ghetto, he didn't have. Karma tells you, my friend, anything that happens, it's your doing. So it's pretty restrictive. Yes?
In order to know what is wrong, what is bad karma, you have to have a set of ethics.
Absolutely. All of the Buddha. And my question is, I always said, if Buddha is not a religion, who the heck made this? Meaning, is this a function of evolution? Meaning, why whatever you do creates something that stays? Where does it stay? And how this idea of bad karma, which light karma and dark karma, What is it? Who is the one running it if there's no deity? Yes.
I mean, if you were part of the elite, let's say if you were the son or daughter of a king or a queen, wouldn't you want something that kept things the way that they were?
Absolutely. But you see, it's so interesting because the Buddha represents the one that rebelled against the status quo, right? The whole history is that he's a prince, and he decides to run away with the princehood because he's breaking it away. But he doesn't, because the whole idea of karma, but it's an amazing story that this is karma. But let's look now. What I want to do is Jewish ideas. I want to go ahead and to see what the Judaism say about karma and samsara. Let me ask you something. We believe that God created the world. Now, there is responsibility for what we do. What we do creates something. In other words, you're responsible. But simply it's because God told you do this or don't do that, so he punishes or he rewards for obeying his orders. That's how Christianity looks at the world, right? He obeys his orders. It's like a cop. The cop tells you stop, even though the light might be green, and the guy tells you stop. If you don't do it, you get punished, right? You are disobeying an authority of law. Is that how Judaism views commandments? Yes.
Sorry, you're making rabbinic Judaism more.
I am going to stake not only rabbinic, I don't want any names. I'm going to go ahead and go to a specific source. One of the specific thinkers, and that's something that's a great point, because we are not going to be falling to the isms idea either, taking like an idea, general idea, like it was canned goods coming out, right? That's not what we're trying to do. We're going to take a specific great Jewish thinker, which is a great Kabbalist. And his name is somebody that we mentioned last week, and his name is Rabbi Luzzatto. He is one of the most fascinating Jewish thinkers. He was one of the greatest Kabbalists. He lived, and by the way, you have here on this website, and I really encourage you to use the website, because I think that's the way how we can never cover enough material unless it's so superficial that it's useless in 3 classes. That's reality, right? Life, that we are bound by time. And 3 hours, it's impossible unless you give such a superficial idea that makes no sense. But if you spend the time reading the materials inside, you can make your own judgments, right? So you have here as one of the modules, module 4 is Rabbi Luzzatto. And here you have actually 4 websites with his biography. He lived from 1710, he was born in 1710 in the 18th century. He was born in Venice. And do you know how long he lived? Yes, he was 40. He was the age of 40. And I'm going to tell you a fascinating story about him. And he wrote his first book he published at the age of 17 is a book on actual poetry. In Italian, using what's called Italian, and in Latin. He has in Hebrew is a book of poetry called Lashon Limudim. And he became a huge prolific writer, and he was a great Kabbalist. He was such a great Kabbalist that people, even rabbis at that time, decided to banish him. They thought that he was the next Sabbatai Tzvi. Because Shabtai Tzvi, if you remember the story of the Sabbateans, the end 1667, 68, the false Messiah, great Kabbalist. So they thought that this guy is going to be the same thing. So they actually had to expel him out of Venice, and he went to Amsterdam, and he became a diamond dealer. And he wrote Kabbalah, and he was of the greatest Kabbalists. He was a prolific writer. He wrote maybe 40 or 50 of the most important books of Kabbalah. Really? And he died, very interestingly. He goes to Israel, okay, when he's the age of 40, and he dies and he's buried right next to Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva was the great sage of the Mishnah that is the founder of the school of mysticism. He is the one who his great student was the author, at least tradition tributes, as the author of the Zohar. And he himself sees himself, he writes the continuation. This Rabbi Luzzatto wrote the continuation of the Zohar in a form of writing, Kabbalistic writing, was called channeling. He wrote the continuation of the Zohar. The Zohar writes 50 esoteric and mystical explanations of the first verse of the Torah, and Rabbi Luzzatto wrote 50 interpretations of the last verse of the Torah, continuation of the Zohar. And he goes there, and he dies right next to Rabbi Akiva, and he's buried there. If anybody goes, and he died at the age of 40. And tradition says that he died at the age of 40. You know why? Because Rabbi Akiva, the Talmud says, for the first 40 years of his life, he was ignoramus. He didn't learn anything. So he believed that he was the reincarnation, the samsara of Rabbi Akiva, to rectify the first 40 years that he did not learn and study. So he comes back, and that's why he dies, and he dies at the age of 40, right next, if anybody wants to see. So these are the websites of his story. And we are going to focus on his writings and comparing how the Kabbalistic writings focus on these ideas. And Rabbi Luzzatto wrote many books. And you'll see how these ideas are in Jewish tradition. Okay? Now, this is the way of God, where he describes the concept of samsara and karma. Okay, let me just open the first page, and I'm going to first give you the broad idea, and then we're going to see inside. Why? First of all, one of the Christian tradition is the actions get rewarded and punished because you're obeying or disobeying instructions. Do we believe that or not? Does Rabbi Luzzatto believe on that or not? Rabbi Luzzatto says no, it's much more. Actions create spiritual energy, exactly karma. And we have to know what does it and what doesn't do it. And the Bible is telling you the spiritual powers of mundane actions. Now let me ask you something. Why was karma necessary? Why did God create the world with karma?
We also have free will.
Why do you have free will? Meaning, why does God give karma? Is it an incentive for us to be good?
Because we're partners in creation.
Aha, excellent. What's your name?
Natalie.
Natalie. What does it mean, partners in creation? It means that God, when he created us, he says, I'm going to create you incomplete, and I'll give you the chance to create yourself. Why did he do that? Why did God do this? What's necessary? Yes, it looks a very boring thing. Why do you need that? Just do it. Forget it. Why? Can anybody tell me? What do the Kabbalists say? Why is karma necessary? Yes?
God wants people to channel the giving of his good.
Why? Why channel? You're right. He might want, but why? I'll tell you Rabbi Luzzatto writes, and this is extremely important for you to know. Because the ultimate good, okay, God is the source of ultimate good. The only way for us to be able to get good and to enjoy, we were created. There is one purpose of creation that the Kabbalists say, and this is written in several verses in the scripture. But the Kabbalists say there's one objective of creation. Can anybody tell me one objective of creation? Summarize this whole thing for one line. Let's have one line. What is the purpose of creation? Why did God do all of this for? What's the purpose of all this? Anybody? Listen, we live here. I mean, you have to know. Like, this is the one-liner that you have to know. The Kabbalists, this Rabbi Luzzatto builds his work on Lurianic Kabbalah. Anybody who was in my classes before knows Lurianic Kabbalah is Rabbi Luria, who wrote his Kabbalah writings, took him to write, you know how long it took? 18 months. Can you imagine? In 18 months. And this is the Kabbalah that dictates us. It was in the 16th century. And this revolutionized Jewish thought and revolutionized Christian thought and revolutionized science. Anybody who was here, that's the beginning of modern science. So Rabbi Luria starts the fruit of life, which is the meaning of life, with one line. God created the world for this purpose. Anybody? Guess. What pleasure? What it means? To pleasure for his pleasure?
No, for the pleasure of the beings.
Why the pleasure of the beings? Why did you want the pleasure of the beings? That's something more basic. Right. The pleasure of the beings is, but what? Because he wanted to bestow kindness to creatures. You can't bestow kindness unless you create two. The revelation of kindness requires a recipient. It's to create a relationship. That's the only purpose of it, to create kindness. Kindness is by giving pleasure, which is the same idea of the Buddha, which is relieving suffering. Right? Pleasure is the goal of kindness. How can we, says, and we're going to see Rabbi Luzzatto, how do you get kindness? How do you get pleasure? You get pleasure by clinging to God. If you connect to God, because the life was a relationship, the relationship is created by connection. That's why physical pleasure is always done by connection. Anybody knows the physical sexual act is an act of connection. When you connect, you create pleasure. The more connected, the greater pleasure. The ultimate pleasure is the connection to God. Connect to create a relationship. But the relationship, because God is not a physical being, God is a spiritual being, the only way to connect, to create proximity, is by having something which is called similarity. It's the law of similitude. We have to be similar to Him. You know what God is? Because God is one, there's nothing besides Him. He can never receive anything. He can only give, right? Because who is going to receive from? Somebody who has everything, what are you going to get for? Right? So God is a giver. But not only that, God is ultimately self-sufficient. Right? Because He can never depend on anybody else, because there's nobody else to depend on. So the ultimate being, divine being, is self-sufficiency. So for us to create similitude to Him, we have to be also in some way self-sufficient. So self-sufficiency means that we are created by ourselves. We are self-made. If you're not self-made, you can't be similar to God. And therefore, all of life, for us to be able to achieve the divine plan, is to create similarity and similitude, is to allow us to be self-made. Self-made is creating karma, because our lives, or the Buddha is saying, we are who we are, not by destiny, but by who we made ourselves. The self-creation is how we can be similar to God. And that's the similitude to God. That's why God created Adam. He said the famous uttering of the word of let us make man. And who is the us? So the Kabbalists, you see Rabbi Luzzatto will say, the us is man himself. So He told us, let us make you. Because this way, you are self-made. The same way I am self-made, you will be in some way self-made also. Therefore, the greatest, if you know something, what is the greatest distance from God that you could achieve ever? If similitude is self-made, what is the highest form of distance from God, according to Rabbi Luzzatto? Dependency. It's exactly right. Charity. Anybody who gets, that's why the Talmud, what you call the verse in Proverbs that says, the one who hates gifts will live. Because if you enjoy getting gifts, if you enjoy getting something for nothing, if you don't want to deserve, so then you can't be close to God. So life makes no sense. The purpose of life is to get us a chance to create ourselves. And that's how karma is understood. That's why karma exists. And we're going to soon see that karma is and we're going to read a passage from Rabbi Luzzatto, who wrote The Way of God, and explaining why karma is so. So don't ever think that God is punishing you. If you punish, we are punishing ourselves. Our actions have consequence. So all of this. So when you look at it and you say, we live a life of rules and regulations, who needs that? We need that because that's how we can create ourselves. We're given the tools. The Buddha always understood that. The Buddha said karma is a given. That's the laws of nature. The same way you cannot discuss or deal with the laws of Newton. You can't laws of nature. There's a law of nature called karma. So use karma for your benefit. What Judaism did, he said, yes, the laws of karma exist, used for benefit, but karma exists for our benefit. God created karma for our benefit. Not like the Buddha says, karma is a given, now use it for your benefit. Karma was created for our benefit. And karma is a responsibility of life. We're going to read together. I would love for you to spend your time during the weekend reading this passage, and you'll see how it decides to karma. And what is the purpose of samsara, which is the Gilgul? Samsara exists also. So according to the Buddha, karma was created for you to get the samsara. So the karma is what creates the samsara, right? So what's the primary and the secondary? Karma creates a samsara, right? You create karma, you get samsara. In Judaism, just the opposite. The reason why you have the samsara is to give us a second chance if we miss the first. So the karma is because karma is creating our being. It's very difficult, as the Buddha himself notes, it's very difficult to create in one lifetime. We get multiple chances to do that. Yes?
Why is charity such a mitzvah in Judaism?
Excellent question. Now, I'm going to just tell you because I can't stay here all night. How many forms of charity there are? Does anybody know? Can anybody tell me forms of charity? No, say, Good guess? 613. More than 4, less than 10. Okay, now we have the universe. 8. Okay? What's the highest form of charity? Higher than anything else? No. It's a great. But that is the number 2. Anonymous is the number 2. Yeah, what's your name? I know, Michael. So what is it? Making sure that the guy doesn't need charity.
Helping them make themselves.
Yes, helping them make themselves and not coming to charity. The highest form of charity is preventing somebody from getting to charity. That's why Jewish law makes a big difference. If you have the famous story, we have a group, a study group in Jewish law. And what the Jewish law says, if you have a chain store, I just went out tonight to a store on 57th, and this guy's closing the store. He's a shoe store. He says, listen, I can't compete with just shoe store because I have across the street Bergdorf Goodman, and they will go ahead and discount all the stuff that I sell, so forget it, I'm out of business. In Jewish law, if you have a chain store and a small store, by you going to the small store and giving the guy a form of livelihood to prevent him from going to charity is the highest form of charity. So you think that giving charity, you buying something, So it's exactly right. Don't laugh. That's exactly right. That's Saturday, but but this is the idea. Guys, this is Jewish law, and the Jewish law makes a big difference because this is the ultimate idea.
What about
And
the other 7?
the other 7. So always the 8 and the 7, as you'll see. The 8 is the master plan. Always in Jewish law, you'll see something very, very recurring. Whenever there is 8 categories, the first category is above all, and the 7 categories is a totally different level. 7 categories is giving somebody charity. The 8th level is the master plan. In other words, if you fail on the master plan, you have always charity. God is not going to let you fall, so he'll get you. But the idea is the master plan. We're always trying to achieve. That's why the 7 days of creation and the magnanimous, the day which is beyond nature, which is the master plan, the nirvana. What is the nirvana? Is the number 8. That's why Hanukkah is the 8 days, right? Because every miraculous idea is 8. Because the 8 is the nirvana. 7, as long as you are in the charity mode, you live in this world, but you are not in the nirvana state. The nirvana state is to achieve with karma total self-independence. Independence is the ultimate trait of life, which means that God says, in the end, I'll give you. But you know what is being a successful Jew and being a failure as a Jew? Successful Jew is the one who gets what he deserves. And a unsuccessful being is the one that gets a charity, that he gets something despite not deserving. And that is a much lower level, and you're entrapped in the reality of life. And that's why you come back again and again to get a second chance to deserve. And this is something I want you to think about it. I want you to read the materials over the weekend. And anybody, now what we're going to do is in this website, there's a lot of stuff that we're putting here. We're going to create a blog that I would love to hear your comments about the readings. And if you have any more interesting readings, I would love to share. Let's share ideas. The idea here of this course is to share ideas. There's no dogma. There is nothing. We want to share ideas. And the important thing of this class is to make us think, to become independent in the aspect of being thinking beings. Not being fed ideas, but actually cultivating and understanding on a critical form ourselves. So eventually, hopefully, the next slides we're going to have a blog and everybody will post on the readings. Do you agree, you don't agree, any new readings, other cultures, and hopefully we'll have a lot of fun. Guys, have a great weekend, huh? The website is Steinhardt Scholars Series. There's so many S's. SteinerScholarSeries.org. You create your password and user ID, and you'll get email. And we'll share ideas between ourselves. And hopefully, eventually, this will become a forum that we could talk to each other through all times in ideas and share ideas. Thank you very much. Have a good night.